Hi everyone, welcome back to 33 Founders. I'm really excited you're joining us today because we're rounding out our collaboration with the 2014 Lean Startup Conference. I'm here with Des Traynor, the co-founder and VP of Customer Success at Intercom. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you, it's great to be here.
Des, I want to start out with your position as the VP of Customer Success, which is the ultimate goal that Intercom is helping other companies accomplish. What does an exceptional customer experience look like to you?
For me, it is when, from the very moment a customer chooses to use or adopt a new solution, they are guided through a series of steps that effectively guarantee their success. And those steps are pre-planned based on a strong, healthy, accurate knowledge of what customers' objectives are. So the way I think about this is oftentimes a lot of first experiences with a product, it's all about what the product wants you to do. So it's like complete your profile, receive our verification email, upload a picture. Whereas none of that's actually in line with what the user is trying to achieve. So if you take a standard project management tool or something like that, if the first step is all about like filling in all the empty blank rows in our database, it's not really about what the customer wants to do, which might be manage my team better or learn how to kick off a project or any of those type of things. So for me, an exceptional customer experience is when the the new user experience, if you like, of the product is directly in line with the goals of the customer itself.
Great. So at the beginning of 2014, you guys had 2,000 paying customers after only 18 months operating. How did you sign on the first ones with that mentality of not overwhelming them with things that they don't want to do?
So it's a good question. We have relentless focus on our customers and what their objectives are. So from a very, very early days, literally customer number one, we asked people when they arrived at Intercom, what are you trying to do today? Like, what problem has occurred in your life such that you think this communications, this new way to connect with your customers is going to help? And the answers vary, but typically they fall into a few different categories. People are looking to support their customers better, engage their customers better, learn from their customers or see what their customers are doing. So we only really got to that clarity, like understanding what those roles are, through just a relentless focus on talking to new users and understanding what their goals are. And then once you realize what someone's trying to do, you can then format your tutorials and your guides and your setup process all around achieving that objective. So it's kind of like the customer's told you what the carrot is, and now you just need to know, as long as you can keep pointing towards that, they will keep engaged with your software. And that worked well for the first 50 customers, and it worked well for the first 2,000 customers.
So let's go back to the days when it was just the first 50 customers. So it's just the first couple months of operating, and every founder at that time is working with extreme uncertainty because you really don't know what territory you're in. So with those 50 customers, Des, how did you reach out to them and communicate with them in a way that didn't overwhelm them or scare them away?
So the first 50 we had been working with, I guess we ran a sort of private beta, so we were inviting people in batches of, 10 to 15 per week. And I'm pretty sure at the time it wasn't possible to start using Intercom without talking to us in some way, shape or form. So we'd send out the invite and people would reply to say they're interested. And then they would land inside Intercom, but obviously Intercom itself is a communications product for businesses to talk to customers. So the next touch point would actually be through Intercom, where we'd be equal parts, demonstrating what Intercom can achieve, but also getting feedback from them straight away. And the real strength there is that you're talking to the customer while they're in the product, and as a result, they're more likely to give you in-context feedback and talk to you about what they're actually trying to do. But also, you're not filling up their inbox while they're asleep. You're not bombarding them with Relentless, it's day 4, now tell us this, now do that. You're actually just specifically talking to them about what they're trying to do, when they're trying to do it. And as a result, the quality of dialogue is much higher.
You've written a lot about feedback, how to get it, when to get it, and why to get it. And it appears that the first goal that companies need to prioritize is getting targeted feedback, not general feedback. So instead of just saying, hey, what do you think of Intercom? You should ask about a specific feature. How can companies do that?
So it's a good question. the default way for companies to get feedback, and I need to explain this just so I can contrast it if you like, but the default way for people to do this is somebody takes over as head of product, or somebody just gets a new job as product manager, and they set up this mail blast to all users asking vague questions about all parts of the product, and it all arrives in one big messy lump of data. And that presents a lot of challenges. For a start, it talks to people who signed up, say, yesterday, with people who've been active, passionate users for 2 years. And you're mixing all these feedback together, like presuming it's all equal. Secondly, if you're asking feature-specific stuff, you'll be asking customers who've never used your reports and analytics feature for feedback on it. And obviously, what are you going to get? You're going to get, well, I looked at it once and it wasn't interesting or whatever. But you're not going to get feedback on how to improve it, nor are you going to get feedback on how to make it easier for people to adopt in the first place, because these people, you're not even hearing about why they haven't done it. So the first thing I would say is, if you're asking for feedback on a specific part of your product, you need to work out what are you going to do with this feedback, and connected to that is kind of what is the state of that feature. So let's say you have a calendar feature and you want to get feedback on it. My question here would be, well, to do what? Do you want more people using it? Do you want people using it more? Do you want to make it better for those that do use it? Do you want to work out why people stop using it? And you'll answer that question, and let's say you say, well, I want more people to use it. I'm like, okay, well then we need to work out what's blocking people who tried to use it. So look for people who created a couple of calendar events and are otherwise active customers, and ask them, hey, why did it never work out with the calendar? And they might say, oh, well, I use Google Calendar and I would have to recreate all my recurring meetings. And you're like, okay, so maybe if we authenticated via Google, we could import all your calendar events, and that would remove that barrier to adoption. Or they might say, well, it's not useful for me because I can't attach files to events. And you're like, okay, how do you currently do that? And they'll show you their current solution. You're like, okay, but the whole point is, you're learning the barriers to adoption. Similarly, if you want to learn how to improve it, you talk to people who are using it all the time and work out what it is, what areas are frustrating, what would unlock more usage. So I think the key thing is, if you're going for feature-specific feedback, you have to target your groups based on feature-specific usage.
I think the way you put it is so important, Des, because one of the big themes at the Lean Startup Conference this year was to iterate on your product based on how people are actually using it, not on how you think they are using it. And you guys had an experience with that with your Maps feature. Can you run us through that?
Certainly. So we have a fairly cool, and I deliberately use the word cool or snazzy or flash, Maps feature in Intercom, which is really popular. And we released a very, very significant upgrade to it maybe 3 months ago, I'd say. Prior to the upgrade, we were quite puzzled or perplexed by why this Maps feature, which, to be clear, what it does is, imagine a Google map overlaid with user icons for every user you have and their location in the world. And we wondered why that was so popular, because we couldn't work out any business value of it. It wasn't good for example, it couldn't tell you what time zones you should be in or where you should offer customer support, because we had way better ways to do that. It couldn't tell you what your most popular cities were, because actually our user list does a much better job of that. It couldn't tell you where you should hold events, because again, you can just, Intercom's user list will just let you filter and target specific cities if you want. So it wasn't very clear what job this was actually excelling at. And nonetheless, it was still quite popular. And one realization came to us, which was that we were stuck on the idea that this was a map. So if we really wanted to improve a map, well, we would have followed all the standard ways to improve a map. You apply good cartographical locations, you apply clustering. Maybe you can drag to zoom on regions, or you can create, you can link users together across different areas, or any of those standard map-like tools that you see. But no one was using it to be a map. When we looked at how people were using it, what they were doing was, people were taking clever screenshots of the map where they'd hide all their business data and they'd share it on Twitter and be like, look how big our business is. Or people were putting it into their PowerPoints or their keynote decks to show investors, oh, and by the way, we have customers all over the world. Or people were showing it in offices on television screens as and they would have it people installed Chrome plugins to make it auto refresh. And then we realized this wasn't a map. This was a vanity piece. This was a show-off piece. And when we looked at how it was used, it became clear that the better way, how do we make it a better vanity piece? Well, we could make it a more beautiful map. We could make a more typographically interesting map. We could make it an easy to share map with a public URL. We could make it possible to download it. We can make it possible to embed it into your company's website. So we did all of those things, and the usage for it, like, skyrocketed, because now when we designed it based on how people were using it, the usage was significant. So now, like, there are like literally thousands of tweets about this, about people showing off their map, and then other people start retweeting it and it gets out. And obviously for us there's an added benefit because people say, that's really cool, how did you create that? Or like, each of the maps comes with its own powered by intercom footer. So the key lesson for me was that improving a product based on how it's used is way better than trying to improve it based on how you think or how you expect it would have been used.
So going with that design process, you mentioned some things that you added. One of the things I'm most excited about that I read in your blog is describing the difference between a scalpel and a Swiss Army knife when it came to the design process. Can you elaborate on that as well, Des?
Yeah, sure. So I think a Swiss Army knife is it's a very popular device in the real world. So it's often kind of a bad metaphor because people like them. But a Swiss Army knife is a collection of marginally useful tools whose only real utility comes from the fact that it's relatively cheap to carry them all together, if you like. So and to tease that out, like, if you got into a knife fight and you pulled out a Swiss Army knife, it's not going to be that useful to the guy who actually has a knife. If you are hosting a dinner party and someone needs to open a bottle of wine and you pull out a Swiss Army knife, it's not going to be as elegant as the rest of the elements of your dinner party. The point being that, like, a knife, if you're optimizing for a knife fight, you're talking about like a long serrated blade. If you're optimizing for a dinner party, you're talking about a classy, elegant wine opener. Where the opposite of a Swiss Army knife to me is a scalpel. So a scalpel is a single purpose tool that's easy to create, easy to test, easy to explain, easy to adopt. And it's very, very clear what it does. It's very clear when it's not working. And so the point I would make to a lot of people who are working on new features or new products, or even starting new companies, is there is a massive overhead to trying to start off with a Swiss Army knife. To trying to start off with you have to build so many unrelated tools and then create this platform that they all sit on. In contrast to, say, starting with a single purpose tool that if you can't get adoption for that, there's no point in building the rest of it. You're not going to mediocre your way to success. So the great thing about a scalpel is that you'll know pretty quickly if your scalpel is working, and you'll know if you can sell your scalpel or if people want the scalpel or what the market for a scalpel is. So I always encourage people when they're planning a new feature. I'm like, right, well, let's start by one thing we know people are trying to do, and let's build a tool for that. And if we can't solve that problem, we're not going to make up for it in bloat. So that for me is the key difference between the two.
So when you discuss the scalpel, you bring up testing new features. I think it's very easy to talk about testing features, say, okay, I'm going to go ask my customers what they think about this, but it's a lot harder to actually do it. Can you give us some examples about how you do that with your features?
Yeah, so when we roll out a feature, the first thing we have like a few different degrees of rolling out. So first of all, it'll be launched live for the team that created it within Intercom only. And like, at that point, it is excusable if certain buttons don't work, or because the only people using it know its current state of completion. So they won't get bug reports about, hey, I clicked this and it didn't work yet, because they're like, I know, I'm still working on it. That's the first wave. The second wave would be to launch it to the entire company, and at that point, we're hoping that whilst we'll accept that there will be bugs or blips or workflows we didn't consider, we're no longer apologizing for its incompleteness. We're saying that this is something that we believe is on its way towards being ready to ship. The next stage is then what we call it's the third part of the feature flag, which is we have a Intercom trusted testers segment of our user base who are the first people to receive anything, and we roll it out to them, and we roll it out to them with an explanation of what we're trying to do with this feature, how we expect it to be used, what problem we think it will solve for them and their business, and then we kind of wait and we see what engagement is like, and then based on it, as always, we talk to the people who are using it to get feedback about how to improve it, and we talk to those who did not find it valuable or who couldn't engage or couldn't adopt, and we work out what was wrong. And at that point, it's great to work out, based on what you learn from the users and the non-users, you can see how it should be framed, how it should be explained, where does it succeed best, what areas should we stay away from because it's not optimal there, what barriers prevent people from adopting it today. And that's kind of our last. Then we'll iterate and we'll keep going, and we'll broaden the test group and we'll iterate and keep going. And then when we're fully ready, at that point we'll then roll it out. But the key piece for me about testing is to start gradual, to not spin any cycles recording stuff you already knew. So that, and that's the real danger when you launch something that is incomplete, is that you end up having to explain it's incomplete a million times over. And then to progressively expand the user base, but only take real feedback from real world usage. Not we don't ask our users here, please try and break this, because that's not what they would do in typical usage. They'd try and use it. So that is a good way to think about it.
You mentioned that you have a group of trusted users that you reach out to first. How did you make that group up?
It's kind of evolved over time. It used to be, when we were smaller, it was kind of just customers we knew. Now, as we're into the thousands, we have an enrollment scheme that we're just actually literally tomorrow, I believe. Sean Townsend, our director of research, is actually going to put out another set of people who can opt in. And what we look for is active, engaged, frequent users of the product. And then we explain that being a trusted tester means that you will get early access to all these features. It does mean, however, that occasionally we might show you something that you'll use and we might take it back because it didn't succeed, or it might not work in the exact way you thought. And we just explain what it means to be basically opting into beta. And we're specific, as I said, we're looking for active users who are already quite passionate about intercom and know what it is we're trying to do. So somebody who's not a good fit will be somebody in their first week. Somebody who's not a good fit will be an inactive user, or somebody who only ever uses us under a certain circumstance. We're looking for people who are what we would consider iconic, or just all around great users of the product who adopt all of our features.
Great. And one of the things, Des, you've shared and iterated numerous times that I love is that companies need to design conversations, not transactions. And when it comes to customer feedback, sometimes you feel overwhelmed. One of my favorite apps right now is the shopping app Spring, and I love it because they never pressure me to buy anything. I enjoy getting the emails, and it's one a day or one every couple of days. How do you design conversations and not transactions?
So a transaction to me feels quite like something that has a defined start and the end, where the customer is just an irrelevant sort of data point. So an example would be if you went to complain to a certain software product, you said, hey, I logged in and I tried to export all my reports and they weren't there, and you get an automatic response saying you are ticket number 117124A, do not reply to this email, we will get back to you in 2 to 3 working days. And the next reference you get is some programmatic auto response or canned response that says we notice you're having problems with your, and then it just kind of fills in all these blanks, and the whole thing kind of feels very robotic, very much like you're filling in web forms. If you can contrast that with, say, the experience where you're on WhatsApp or Telegram or any of these modern chatting apps, where the whole design is there to flow around a conversation between two people. So this influences all elements of your design. It influences things like presence, like knowing the other person is typing, the size of the text field, because there's a difference between being offered a space to drop in 2,000 characters and a really big area where you attach files and attach files and set priority and choose the department you want your ticket to go to, versus saying, hey, I have a quick question about this dress I'm considering buying off Spring. So for me, designing conversations enables one person to talk to one person, or it can be a multi-way chat, but it specifically optimizes for the idea that it's a human on both ends of the line. There will be frequent back and forths, and the resolution will come as a result of these frequent back and forths, and it won't necessarily be communicated by a red flag or a green flag when it's complete. So when you're talking about designing conversations, it's really optimizing for real human contact, lightweight interactions, back and forths, smileys, etc. And as I said, the opposite of that is transactions, where you are treated effectively no different than an API call, where it's like customer is unsatisfied, move customer to state neutral. That's how I think about it.
So companies should approach it then like they're talking to a friend, not like they're just talking to the next person in line.
Yeah, and like that doesn't necessarily have to inform, say, the tone on which you speak, but just the manner in which you speak. So what I mean by that is that it's okay for a bank to be formal. It's okay for an architect's firm or a solicitor's firm to speak to you like, respectfully with professional distance. By that I mean maybe they choose not to be maybe they choose not to be super casual with their lingo, but the key difference for me is they choose to talk to you like, so they'll say, hey, how are you today? And you say, I'm good, thanks, I'm having a problem with this. Okay, let me have a look. Well, I've pulled this up and here's the record. Is that not what you think? Whereas I think the nature of a transaction is very much give me everything you know up front, go away, and I'll come back to you in 2 to 3 working days when I have everything I know back.
We'll get back to you in 2 to 3 working days.
Yeah, exactly. And if you can, the metaphors I try to encourage people to look for are like, if you imagine checking into the Four Seasons Hotel or the W or something like that, and if you think of if you went to the front desk and said, hey, I have a problem, the sink is not working in my room, what they'll say is, okay, got it, you're in room 1121, I understand, sorry, Mr. Traynor, we'll have that fixed by the time you come back. Whereas the way web companies work would be like, you'll have to report that over with the bellhop, and the bellhop will send you somebody else, and then somebody else will say, well, in 2 to 3 working days, we'll have this fixed. And if you come back to them again, they'll have forgotten who you were. They'll try to report a new problem. They're like, oh, please fill in this new form all over again because we've already forgotten who you are, even though you're spending thousands of dollars a year with us. So I think having a memory of the customer, understanding who they are, understanding what their conversational history is, understanding and not asking them anything you can already address or find out yourself are all important elements to a real conversation and ultimately to having a proper human-to-human conversation.
I think that's one of my favorite things about Intercom is because at the core, you guys are a tech company helping companies connect with their customers, but it really doesn't feel like a tech company. It feels like a family who's driving other communities to also build relationships, which I love. Des, one of the big themes at Lean Startup was to get out of your comfort zone a little bit and experiment and dabble in creative spaces because that's the way that you're going to be able to solve problems in non-traditional fashion. How do you do that? What do you do that has nothing to do with Intercom that helps you come up with these great solutions?
I think, I guess I would read a lot is one thing, and not specifically business books. Like I read a lot of autobiographies of people. I try to play a lot of sports, which again, sports is sadly a common metaphor in business, and I say sadly because it doesn't appeal to everyone. But I also I think I try to study lots of I try to move away from studying this generation of web companies. I'm very interested in businesses everything from the Great Depression forward, how companies succeeded and thrived, and I find there's true history is a great source of inspiration. One of the quotes I really like is those who fail to understand the past will never understand the future, or will never see the future. And I really believe that that's true. There's most patterns we see today and we think are incredibly novel actually have massive precedent, and not even precedent in the Bronze Age, but precedent in the 70s or the 50s or the 30s. And I think it's really interesting. One way of thinking about this, for example, is our CEO Owen. One of the core parts of the idea for Intercom is about this idea of recreating real world customer service, because for thousands of years, customer service, we didn't have ticket desks to control our customers. We actually had to talk to them like humans. And so when we moved towards a world, we made 2 shifts at the same time. We made a shift to a world where all businesses became slightly less personal because they became web businesses, and we also made a shift towards businesses becoming software as a service, so relying on recurring loyalty. So, which is, if you put those 2 things together, it can be dangerous because you're taking away the personal touch, but you're also putting a new importance on loyalty that never existed before. So, when you look at both of those shifts in what the web has enabled, you realize that loyalty is going to become really, really important. And what occurred to Owen when he was in his favorite coffee shop here in Dublin was that, like, the I guess the founder slash owner knew everyone's name and knew everyone's coffee order and was able to, like, predict exactly what they wanted, when they wanted, if they wanted another coffee, etc. And, like, all of those things come second nature to somebody who's running a real world business, but they don't come second nature to you if you're running a web business. And so recreating a lot of that is what Intercom is about. But similarly, like, when we look, I read a lot about, say, like, as I said, old business stories, things like, stories about, say, the steel industry, the movie industry as it started, the airline industry, how it imploded. All of these things are real fascinating sources of learning for me. I think that's where, like, some of my more possibly, you could call them batshit or you could call them creative, but, like, that's certainly where some of the more batshit ideas about the world and how it works come from.
Great, and I can definitely tell just by looking at your Twitter that you're always looking to innovate by things, and it's clear you're an avid reader. How are you using that mentality to drive the company for 2015? If we're sitting here, it's December 2015, we're getting ready for the holidays. What do you want to be talking about?
Innovation primarily. I want to be talking about, like, the new ways that Intercom has, connected people with their customers. So what that might look like is just, what it looks like is effectively, it's kind of like a remapping or a transpose of what Intercom has done up until now. But it's really a relentless focus, going deeper than anyone could conceivably go on the key concepts of Intercom. So, like, how can we truly connect? Like, what is the most real connection between a business and a customer? And we think, like, we're maybe like 1% done on this. We think it can go way deeper. And then other challenges that I have, like, presented as we've grown is, like, how can we make it more feasible for larger companies? How can we make it? How can you deal with, say, like, hundreds of millions of customers while still offering some degree of service? And we took some steps that way this year, but we'll continue that. We offered a lot of, like, what we call lightweight interactions. So rather than having to receive written thanks from every customer, they can just give you thumbs up, thumbs down, and we're going to continue to innovate on ideas like that. But I think basically what a successful year for Intercom looks like is, a consistent innovation on ways to connect businesses with their customers. So if we're sitting here and in December 2015, and let's totally do that. If we're sitting here and like the core product doesn't have new ways to drive connections between business and customers, it hasn't been a great 2015. If we're sitting here and I'm talking to you about a whole new way of doing things that is even deeper and more meaningful for businesses, delivering results for business, connecting with their customers, then it's been a successful year.
Perfect. Well, I can't wait to watch you do that. Before we go, can you tell people how they can stay in touch with you and stay in touch with the company?
Sure. So our blog, which a lot of your listeners might be familiar with, is at blog.intercom.io. The company itself is Intercom, and it's at intercom.io. And my name is Des Traynor, and it's just Des Traynor on Twitter, all one word, all lowercase, like that matters.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining us, Des.
Thank you so much for having me.